Alright, so I'm going to really quick run through and show you maybe if you want this figure to be glass, how you would do that in Redshift. There's like a few weird settings you need to go into and check off. So first of all, I'm just assigned it a new material, like glass. And then I'm going to, you can do one of two things. You can just grab like a glass or a water preset. And the downside, so I want to turn on Caustics for this, which are going to make these shadows down here look a lot nicer. In this case, I'm just going to be like, the heck with it. I'm just going to use this glass preset. It's fine. So when you'll notice like maybe this doesn't quite have the shadows that I expected. At the bottom of this, it's like a little too see-through. I can't really see like the back of this object. So there's a few options that you need to go check to sort of remedy that. So in this case, we want to use Caustics. I do not know how to explain what Caustics is, but it makes glass and water and clear things look nicer and have like cool reflections coming out of them. Makes them a little more realistic. It also drastically increases your render times, potentially depending on the settings that you have to use. But anyway, so the first thing that you need to do is go into your light. So in this case, I'm just going to grab my rim light. And I'm going to scroll all the way down. And under this little tab that says photon, you want to look down, ignore this, ignore emit GI photons. It's kind of an outdated system, but you want to do emit caustic photons. Check that on. And then I'm going to do another render of this. And you can see that there's like a little bit of something kind of going on down here. You get like a little bit of neat reflections. This maybe has a little bit more depth to it. The other thing I need to do is actually go through in the object itself. In this case, it used to be like 50 different objects. I've combined them into one because I don't hate myself. So if you go into your figure shape node, scroll down under the Redshift section, which I closed. And you want to go down to this visibility box, check this on to enable it, and then you'll be able to edit all of this nonsense. So here's like the cast shadows, receive shadows, all of that stuff from the Redshift. So I just checked off cast shadows, which, to be fair, really didn't do much. But anyway, the setting you're looking for is cast caustic photons. Usually this is by default checked off. I, in this case, want to go and turn that, actually, let me do a render with it turned off, because I think I had that rendered the whole time, because I'm a dingus. Yeah, okay. So this is, this side here is what it looks like normally without this checked on, and then if I, again, I'll render this with Caustics. And you can see that it makes much more interesting sort of depth and dimension going through here. So this is like Caustics, Caustics, no Caustics, Caustics. And basically it just sort of helps add a little bit of, I guess, depth and dimension to your glass and such. But so you need to go through and make sure that this is selected for each object that you have Caustics on. So like if I, Lord help me, I'm going to duplicate this object and I'll turn off cast Caustics. I'm going to render this whole image. And you can maybe see here, so like the difference between the two. Literally same exact settings. And this one has like a much nicer shadow compared to this guy. So again, I'll turn on Caustics, and I'm just going to render the base of this. And you can see that it does have that little bit of that nice shadow again. I keep questioning whether or not my ground is clipping through things. In this case, I'm just going to make it floating and see what happens. I mean, it does, well, looks ridiculous, but it is kind of an interesting effect if I move my ground plane down drastically. But anywho, so that's how you would use Caustics. The other thing that you can play with is the index refraction of your glass. So I'm just going to get rid of this dude. So here's my glass. I'm going to just render this whole thing real quick. Oh, huzzah! And it got really weird and glowy down there. I think my ground plane is clipping through my object, which seems to sometimes cause slight slight awkwardness at the bottom of this. Let's see if that actually fixes it. I'm curious. Oh, I scrolled out. Yeah, so my ground plane clipping did not great things for the base of this object. I do find that Redshift is like a little picky with stuff clipping through your caustics. Even if you like vert snap it, sometimes you need to move it down like a fraction of an inch. I don't know, that's just been my experience. I don't know if I'm just being paranoid or what, but anywho. So I'm going to go into my glass settings, and I might fiddle with the index of refraction, so maybe take this down to like 0.3. So this is like if you have something like a plastic water bottle, or I'll do 1, make it like really obnoxious to see what I'm doing. This is going to change basically how light bends and distorts as it goes through this glass. You're gonna render? Wow, it's just still casting photons there. Awesome. Oh god. Apparently, fiddling with your index of refraction can dramatically mess with your render times. Alright, well that was terrifying. Let's take this up to like 3 and see what that does. Yeah, so I mean, you can see that this is like a very different look from this over here. You have like the rings clearly going around in the background. I find 3 tends to be less distortion when you look straight through stuff, and 1 tends to be more, I don't know, I don't really know how to describe it, it's kind of weird. But you can actually look up like real world refraction for different types of glass and other things. See what that does, like 0.2 versus 0.1, completely different looks. Maybe I'll try 1.01. I think it just doesn't like, I think it just doesn't like values of like actually 1, because that I think just gets, yeah, I mean, so setting it to, yeah, 0.01 makes it pretty much, the whole thing just goes invisible, more or less. Looks kind of cool, actually, if you're looking for like the shadow of it. But yeah, and then, so usually, I think glass is usually like 1.51 or something, which is why it's set to that by default, especially for the glass shader. But yeah, so I mean, you can fiddle with that to get something that you like. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up really quick, there are samples. So if you ever find your glass looks really flat, in your render settings under this photon tab, this is render using Redshift photon tab. If I set this refraction tracing depth to 0 and render this, is going to look real gross. You can see it's pretty much gotten rid of any redeeming qualities of the caustics that we've added. So there's no real reflection. There's no like cool reflections or anything like that on the floor. If I set this to 1, you'll see just a little bit of reflection on the floor, like a little bit of distortion in there. And again, I'll just compare that to like 10. And then you get lots of refraction. So like this, usually setting these higher will boost your render time slightly, but I find it gives a much more realistic, sort of nicer looking effect than not having anything there, if that makes sense. And you can also, should you choose to, tint your glass. I can make this blue if I wanted to. It's gonna be, okay, that's actually maybe a bit of a strange example because I have a bright green light shining on this. I don't know. You can tint your glass if you want. Normally it's more obvious if you're not using a green light. Like this red. I think it's Redshift or Arnold they just have a default red glass or like tinted glass texture or whatever that like defaults to this, but it could be an interesting way, potentially if I'm gonna make this like a wee bit rougher. I'll render this, and you can see this is like kind of an effect of sort of maybe like a frosted glass or a jade. And in this case, like I still like leaving caustics on if it's not destroying my rendering, but it's also not affecting the stuff nearly as much, or it's not affecting like the shadow and stuff like that nearly as much. Changing the index of refraction, again, still will do weird things to your renders, or to your render depending. Actually, That's pretty cool looking. I don't know what that looks like, but that's trippy. It actually just looks like a blend. I think I'm just having blend flashbacks. But anywho, so that's that. I'm gonna set this back down to a roughness of 0 really quick. How about you stop rendering and then re-render? All right, cool. So I have my like weird clear stuff here. I'm going to turn off the color on this. All right. So the one downside I found to the caustics is they don't seem to show up in the. They don't seem to show up in the like sort of IPR render view that that Redshift does. So it will show up if you just do like a straight render, like you just go to Redshift and render. They will show up there. But it does seem like if you do an IPR, they won't show up. So again, you do need to do like a real render for that. Just going to Redshift and render. What? Redshift and render. And then it should go through and like properly render your image. But yeah, so I mean that's pretty much glass and caustics in Redshift.